Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how have you been this week?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks. James, I had a problem recently. I had a spare bit of space on my shelf, and the only thing I thought to fill it with was another cube.
Yeah, you've got to stay on top of that, the spaces can get a bit roomy.
Yeah. It can't look empty. It's all about making my dining room look good. That's definitely the reason why I've gone ahead and built another cube, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've gone ahead and built a mono blue desert cube. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the cube and also the kind of design and build process in case you were thinking about building a desert cube yourself. Before we get into that, a quick bit of housekeeping. As always, there will be time codes down in the show notes below if you want to jump around to certain parts of the episode, as well as a link to a card gallery where we'll show every card that we talk about if we don't read them out. And also down there'll be a link to a YouTube version if you want to see the pretty pictures move around the screen. While you're down there, please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review. Thumbs up greatly helps us out do cool and new things. But let's talk about my new cube. Is this number 5? Is this number 6? There's no way of knowing. For a while, I wanted to build a desert cube. I drafted one for the first time at the very first Cube Clash, about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago now. And I really liked the way it flipped the draft on its head.
Before we get into that, we know what mono blue means, but what is a desert cube for our listeners?
Yeah, so a desert cube, it kind of comes in two basic flavors. Like the general gist is that the ones that I have played, it means that you have to draft your lands. So it's a slightly bigger cube. The cube's maybe about 30% bigger than it would be normally, but you draft your lands. Like lands are a resource. Like the desert part is that like the lands are drying up, they're hard to get, that kind of stuff. I have seen some versions where they like restrict it to like only having one land in the land box. So like you have to draft all your colors, but you can have as many swamps as you want. Like for me, I liked the conceit of you have to draft everything, including your lands, and that's what this desert cube is.
Yeah, I think that's cool. And it's an interesting restriction to put on the players, right? So you say the cube is bigger. Presumably we're also drafting more cards?
Yes, generally you are. So for full context, the version I have built is a 4-player cube. So that would be, I guess, a 2-bit, as it were. But the version I have built is 216 cards. How I got there is that traditionally, when you do an 8-player desert cube, you draft 3 packs of 18. So basically what I did is I just multiplied that and up to scale so that every card was drafted and it had enough for 4 players. And that's how I ended up at 216.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. So you have enough slots to get roughly the same number of spells drafted as you would in a normal cube, plus the slots because you have to draft your lands, including your basic lands.
Yeah, because of the makeup, you are playing a higher percent. Well, you're playing a much larger percentage of your picks because the lands are in there as well. But like the pool of cards that you're not running is not as big as a normal draft. But like there's still enough room for you to make picks. It's not like you have that emblem or that conspiracy where you have to play every card you draft. You still have enough cards to build a deck, basically. You're still cutting about 15 to 20 cards.
Yeah, for sure. But not a lot of transformational sideboard plans in the desert cubes, I've found.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Like the actual number is you have 14 cuts to make. So that's still wiggle room. You still have plenty of time to build the deck that you want. Another thing that I liked about the idea of Desert Cube is I also quite like the form factor. If I'm honest, I like the idea of a whole cube that fits in a fat pack. That's quite nice to me. That's one thing I can put in my bag, bring to the pub, and we can play as 4 players. That's quite nice.
Yeah, for sure. Getting to just have a cube in the bottom of your bag is quite nice. There are spots where you would like the cube, and you're just like, oh, here's a cube I have lying around, and that's great. So, talked about why a desert cube. What led you to going mono blue?
Yeah, so when I was thinking about what I wanted from a desert, I knew I wanted that. I wanted the lands to matter, But I kind of realized that it didn't specifically mean that the colors of mana had to matter. Like the fact that you are doing stuff with lands and having to draft lands is interesting in itself. And I kind of settled on the idea of mono blue because I've built cubes before that have not been full 5 colors. Like I built a Sultai Tublet a couple of years ago, and kind of like I've definitely found like there are very easily ways of making decks and archetypes that don't follow the color pie. Like, as long as, like, I knew going into it, I knew I would need to have specific or like different themes to make it work. But like, I felt that blue, to begin with anyway, had the most interesting things that I could do with it as a starting point, and had like enough themes to make it interesting. And also, it means that kind of like one of the things that kind of like we've heard on like the other podcasts talk about, and like we've touched on a few times here, is like that like mental capacity that comes with a draft. Like, you can't throw too many things at your players. And like from my experience of doing deserts in the past, like having the notion of you have to draft your lands when you have to then worry about the colors of lands as well, that can take away, for me anyway, from the experience. So for me, taking the color part of it out of it, stripping that away, makes it easier for my cubers to draft the cube and enjoy themselves, as long as I was still doing interesting thing with the lands. Like, if it was all islands, that wouldn't be interesting. But like, you can throw in tap lands, you can throw in lands that don't generate colors of mana, you can add in artifact lands, you can do different things with them, and that's how you kind of regain that element of like drafting lands is interesting and still matters, but without having to worry about like the colors, basically.
Yeah, that checks out. I do think from the one draft I've done of this cube, I've learned about more variations on tapped island than I knew existed.
I think you found out about every alternative of island that comes into play tapped.
Yeah, it was very good, very good. Love a good Halimar depths.
Exactly.
So it sounds like, so that makes sense for a 4-player cube as well, right? Because it can be tricky to do a 4-player cube with the full 5 colors and not have it devolve into like one person is the only person in that color and their deck is completely cracked. So I think going for a 4-player desert cube monocolor makes loads of sense, actually. I think that's quite cool.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think with a desert as well is, not a desert should never be someone's first cube. It should not be the first cube you built. It's always going to be a second or a third cube. It's always going to be a cube you pull out every so often. And when you're doing that, it means that generally there's going to be less people that naturally want to do it, if that makes sense. And like we've definitely found that kind of in our play group, that kind of like, if it's on a weekend, we can get between 6 and 8 people to draft quite comfortably. On a weekday, there's less people about. People are doing things, people have things on, and that's kind of more where this is for. If I'm honest with you, it's more for like us doing stuff midweek, because like the only 4-player cube that we currently have in our rotation is your version of the Ornithopter cube, which is a lot of fun. But like, and it really did great at filling that role of what do we have midweek to do. Actually, I guess we have Auto Battler as well, but like it's a thing to do midweek, and like effectively this is just another thing that we can kind of put in my bag, take to the pub. We'll play for a couple of hours and then we'll go on our merry way. And like, yeah, that kind of form factor was quite nice to me.
Yeah, no, seems really, really nice to have as an option. So you sort of talked about why you wanted to go mono blue desert. What was your process for sort of picking out your constraints that you wanted to apply to this cube?
Yeah, so I think with the desert, like you already have kind of your theme, if that makes sense. And I think it's important to lean into that. You're theming it around the idea that lands are a resource, lands are a rarity. So therefore, kind of leaning into that, I think, is important at every point. For me, as I kind of already touched on, we then, like, whenever you're building a cube, number of players is important. I knew I wanted to build it for 4, so that was sorted. The question of, are you drafting your all the lands or not? Are you giving them their land box? Like I mentioned, like some people do the you can have as many swamps or plains or wastes as you want, but you have to generate your colors in the cube. For me, I thought it like if I'm going to do a desert, I wanted it to be the full sweaty experience of pack 5. Do I have enough lands? There's no saving me in the land box. I like the idea of everything being in there, just being a nice form factor. That was important. So for me, for this anyway, the drafting all the lands within the cube was important. The next thing that was important for me for a desert, and for any cube, and this question is very important for a desert, is what is the power level? In a desert cube, I personally think that the power level should be quite low. Like, you're actively giving your players a bad mana base. So therefore, you can't, like, if you then have super efficient spells that snowball quickly, they will just take over, and it will kind of lead to so many non-games, because in this cube, there is a high potential that someone might not play a land every turn for the first 5 turns, because you're limited to what you have drafted. Some people, like I did make it so that in the cube there is enough for everyone to have 19. That was the number I figured on. But there's a world where someone drafts slightly more, which means someone ends up with slightly less. So like, there's a real world where someone could be running a 15, 16 land deck, and if just super powerful, efficient cards that come down and take over a game and snowball are in it, it means that it means that it's not going to be as fun. So for me, having the lower power level in a desert is important because it gives people time to catch up. It means people can't get too far ahead. But then also, if I'm honest with you, like, I have a bunch of cubes that do powerful things. There's a bunch of cool jank that I want to run, and like, for me, this was the perfect place to do it.
Yeah, no, I think there's some really cool card choices in there that you don't get to see in many cubes. The renowned Weaponsmith package is an absolute banger. I will say, I think one of the things we absolutely nailed with this cube was the ratio of lands to spells, and the fact that the lands aren't all on the same power level is quite cool. It really did feel like there was that sweat and you really had to work for it. I think the draft I did, I just got to 17 lands, and it really needed 17 lands in my deck. But I had to play like some really, really bad ones. I think I was playing a Lair in my mono blue deck, which...
Oh, yes.
For those who don't know, the Lairs are like... They're like Karoo lands, except they only tap for 1 mana. You know, you've got to return a land to play, but you see it back to your hand from play, but it still only taps for 1 mana. So you're kind of just down a mana. It's a bit tough, but we made it work. But yeah, I felt like it really had that good sweat. Like, so you mentioned the Ornithopter cube earlier. I think I'm kind of want to rebuild my 2-bit version of that a little bit, because one of the small issues I have with it is I think there are slightly too many Ornithopters. Yeah. Like, I don't think you need to sweat enough. And I think the land ratio in this really does make you sweat, and I think that's cool.
Yeah. I settled on 19 just because, like, obviously a deck needs 17, and like, because this is also like power level wise, it's kind of like limited pre-2020 Magic, if that kind of makes sense. Like, that's kind of really what it's like when we go through it a bit more, like there are some power outliers, but you have to draft around them. But like, generally speaking, that's kind of what it settled on. But like, but yeah, when it came to the lands, I was thinking, okay, a deck might want 18 potentially. But like, so the 90 number I thought that is enough for everyone to get them, but you have to actively get like part of it was like, I wanted the lands to matter. Like, I wanted an island to be a defensible pack 1, pick 1, because you know it's going to go in your deck and you know it's going to be good. The first time I played this, I definitely did my math wrong. I was like, okay, I think we ended up doing 6 packs of 9 to replicate the 3 packs of 18. I was like, okay, I need 2 lands a pack and I'm going to be golden. Then halfway through, I redid my math. I was like, no, that's wrong. I only have 6 lands halfway through. I was like, oh wait, I've done my math awfully. The last half was very sweaty. We got there though. Like, if I'm going to do a desert, I want to lean into that. I want to have those moments where it's like, there's this awesome card, but there's a land I need to make my deck function. That's kind of why you're doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the selection of lands is nice as well. Like, Island is not the best lands, but it's definitely like solidly top half of the power level of lands, you know, because there's a lot of tapped stuff in here. And, you can afford a few tap lands in your deck without them punishing you, right? But the more tap lands, look, like the 6th tap land you add to your deck is way more impactful than the first tap land you add, right?
Yeah.
Because the first one you draw, you can get away with playing at a point in your curve where it doesn't hurt you at all. If you draw 3 tap lands, the third one is like definitely hurting you and stopping you playing a spell when you would be able to. And the way the mana base is set up in this cube, we've got to be on like close to 50% of the lands enter tapped, right?
I would assume so, yes.
So there is like a pretty big premium, I think, on lands that enter untapped, which is cool. And it's an interesting puzzle of how you're meant to prioritize those things versus spells.
And that also, like the lands also directly kind of affect the power level. Like it's one of the reasons why the power level can't be that much higher, because people are going to be playing tap lands they're not going to be playing on curve. Like with the lands as well, it also directly kind of, when I was choosing them, like, so this is a mono blue cube, but there are a couple of ways of generating mana outside of those colors. And that was very deliberate. Like I like the idea of there being ways of playing other colors, but you have to really work for them. It's not like 95% of your deck will be blue. You might have one splash, if that makes sense. And there's a few ways you can do that, and I was quite careful with the lands. Like specifically, like I've put like 1 or 2 of the verges in here. They're the lands that tap. I've put the ones that tap for a blue, or they can tap for a different color if you control an island. Because we're making them care about the islands. It's not free, like the lands mattering. Like that's kind of the base. And like yeah, James mentioned the layers. Like they are ways of making other colors, but they're not good. They're not reliable. You're not going to do it on turn 1 or early in the game. That kind of stuff. Like another card is a card like Ancient Spring. Can then display tapped, taps to add for a blue, or you can sack it to add a white or a black. That's how you're casting your card with a black splash. You get it one time, that kind of stuff. And like, but there's a couple of ways of like making treasure in this, but not a great amount. Like it's, you have to do something. You have to go through a hoop to get your spells. And like for me, because I decided it was going to be blue quite early, leaning, like again, I chose something. I'm leaning into it, and that was important. So like there are some powerful cards in here that are in other colors. There's like Carpet of Flowers, very powerful card that makes a bunch of blue mana. Or that makes a bunch of mana equal to the number of islands your opponent controls. Very broken in this. But how are you actually casting it? Like, there's a card like Scold in here. Whenever a player taps an island for mana, deals them a damage. Incredibly powerful. But like, there's only like 4 or 5 ways in the whole cube of making red. Very powerful, but you have to build around it. And that was very important.
Yeah, and it's cool as a way of getting powerful splashy effects into what is quite a low-powered cube, fundamentally. Yeah. Is that you add that extra limitation of red mana as a difficult thing to come by.
Yeah, exactly, and for me, like there are a few other cards that kind of like live in that sort of. So like a card like Dread Return is in, for example. Like 2 black, it's almost impossible to hard cast in this. Like technically doable, but you are taking a bad land and a treasure creature and hoping to draw them in order, and then Dread Return. But the flashback is interesting. The flashback for 3 creatures effectively makes it a colorless card. So there's those kind of things sprinkled in. And in any cube where you're kind of limiting colors, still think of cards with alternate casting costs. I think that's quite important as well. I thought that was quite a cool way of doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. All right, so I notice in this cube that we are not sticking entirely to Singleton. Do you want to talk me through why that is?
Yeah, so that's for a few reasons. Firstly, like the very first Desert Cube broke Singleton. We're breaking it already, like from the off, because we have islands in the cube. We have like 20 islands. That's immediately breaking Singleton. The first Desert Cube that I think was made had a bunch of accumulated knowledges and a lot of Kindles. And like when I was thinking about it, again, because of that memory load, because of that like complexity. Like how much a player should have to handle when building, like when playing a cube. Running cards that come in multiples and care about multiples is a nice way of taking a load off of a player, because you only have to read accumulated knowledge once. So specifically in this cube, there are 8 accumulated knowledges. 1 in a blue, instant, draw a card, then draw cards equal to the number of accumulated knowledge cards in all graveyards. Probably been errated, but it basically does the same thing. you only have to read that card once and you know what it does. And like when you're sweating about like what's my land count, just having that little bit of load taken off you, I think is important. Like I haven't gone too hard with it. Like originally there was like a bunch of other packages that cared about like cards with the same name, but that's where like the Renowned Weaponsmith stuff comes in. Again, I'll go over that a bit more when we talk about some of the packages, but like Renowned Weaponsmith, like there's 2 of those, and it has an ability that lets you tutor up a cards named Heart Pisser Bow or Vial of Dragonfire. So kind of like there's 6 cards in here, but you only have to read 3 of them. And also it's kind of nice in the draft of like it's a combo that has what the bits you want written on the card. It's something cool you can do in this power level of cube that is written for the player. They don't have to work out how does this combo like what are the deep combos of this cube. Like stuff with names I think is very interesting, and like I wanted to do stuff with like names matters for a while, and this seemed like a perfect place to slide it in. And one of the best ways you can do it is breaking singleton.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the AK thing is cool actually, because there's 8 AKs in the cube, and you know they're all opened, right? In a 4-player draft. I think it's sort of an interesting puzzle of when do you want to get involved in the fight for the AKs and when do you not? Because also, obviously, AK normally, you know, is like bad with 1, pretty bad with 2, getting interesting at 3. But when most of your opponents are going to have, like, say I have no AKs, right? At the end of a draft, and then I know my opponents on average are going to have like 3 AKs each. So if I see the last AK, I probably want to run it as a singleton, right? And just free roll off my opponent's AKs in most of the matchups.
Yeah, my gut is everyone would want at least 1 AK, and then maybe some people go ham and try and get the 2, or like, get the 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And then in the mirror, you're like, aha, I draw 6 cards now.
Yeah. And you also end up, the games are all interesting, right? So normally how it plays out when both players have AKs is that neither player wants to cast them. And because you don't want to be the one casting AKs 1 and 2, drawing 1 card and then 2 cards, then your opponent casts AK number 3 and 4 and draws 3 cards and then 4 cards. You've come out very badly from that exchange. So often what happens is you get to sort of the end point, the late game, and both players have a couple of AKs in hand, and eventually someone gets behind, feels the need to cast their AKs to get something going, and generally it goes well for their opponent. But it's an interesting puzzle, and I like that card, and you don't get to play it in cubes very often, so I think it's a nice inclusion.
Yeah, and like that's definitely kind of taking a little bit of inspiration from like Dan, if I'm honest with you. It's one of like the version of Dan I have has, I think, 8 acknowledges in it, which I don't think is the norm anymore. But I like, that little sub battle is really cool, and it's not, as you said, you don't get to do it that often, which is very fun. But yeah, and effectively, like what we've just gone over is important for like anyone building a cube for the first time, or any type of cube, like working out your constraints, working out your numbers of players, working out like your lands, working out your power level, and like questions like singleton and colors. Those are very important. But specifically with a desert, you're kind of flipping it a bit, because like are you breaking singleton is way more important. What are you doing with your lands is way more important. And like, yeah, it's one of the cool things about building a desert is that you're working within the confines of something you know, but you get to kind of, how does this change how I build the whole thing? And that's really interesting. That's like that's one of the reasons I wanted to build this. Yeah, it was a cool design experience as well. So a lot of fun.
Nice. So let's move on and talk about some of the archetypes involved. So it's always tricky with like monocolor or cubes without the full 5 colors, right? You need a way to make sure that the decks aren't all the same. Because normally we get that for free because everyone's a bunch of different colors, so they can only play certain cards. We don't have that in a mono blue deck, right? And you don't want to end up at the point where everyone's just like, take the best card out of every pack because they're all the same color. I think we've done quite a good job here of having like different packages and archetypes. How do you find that changes though in a desert cube versus a regular cube?
Yeah, so specifically like with this cube, I know I wanted everything to be slightly light touch. Like from the deserts I've done in the past, they've generally had like 4 or 5 big overarching archetypes that kind of you can fall into, again, because of that, like because of how complicated, because people are already worrying about one thing, like how many lands do I have. Trying to build a complex archetype can be a bit much. It's not as enjoyable. So when I was building this, for me, it was important to have 4 or 5 big themes and then have a bunch of like little packages that kind of makes the decks a bit more unique. And kind of like, I guess the packages is more the fact it's one color, because if it's, for me, if it was overarching themes, then you just end up with decks blending into each other a bit much. For me, so the overarching archetypes is kind of the desert part of it. The mono blue part is like the individual packages, because then it gives each deck a different flavor. Like not everyone is actively not doing the same thing. Like it means you can have two decks that kind of care about drawing cards, but one of them is doing this with it, one of them is doing that with it. Like making the decks different, I think in that way was important.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. So getting into what some of those archetypes look like. So I see there's a lot of cards in here that care about us drawing cards, which makes sense in a mono blue cube.
Yeah, so like the first point of this was like asking myself the question of like, what is blue good at? What can it do well? What can it easily support? And like the first part is drawing cards. Blue is very good at drawing cards. I knew I wanted 8 accumulated knowledges. That's a cool way of like being rewarded for drawing cards is I'm rewarding people for doing the thing they want to be doing anyway. If I say the word mono blue to someone, they're like, I'm going to draw a lot of cards. So the rewarding them for that makes a lot of sense. Like again, let's talk about power level here, because like the payoff for this is a card like Klinquant Sky Mage. This is 3 in a blue for a 1/1 bird wizard with flying. Whenever you draw a card, put a counter on this creature. So by itself, overcosted for the stats. But if you're drawing 6 cards off of your accumulated knowledge, then this becomes very scary. You also have a card like Nadir Kraken, which I quite like. This is 1 blue for a 2/3. Whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1. If you do, put a counter on it and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So if we're doing the cool things, that like if we're drawing cards, this can become a powerful threat. It's not a powerful card on its own. It needs help, and that's kind of the power level that I was kind of going for with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. The Klinquant Sky Mage was always absolutely giant for me. It was like just a 6/6 for next turn every single time. It felt great. But yeah, you do have to do that bit of work to get it going, I guess. So we've got drawing cards matters. I can also see quite a lot of discarding cards matters.
Yeah, this kind of came about because like when I thought, I was like, okay, I want to be drawing cards in blue. Like, let's look, like, again, for me, it kind of comes back to the lands. It's kind of like, that's kind of like the lands I really want to matter in this cube, because that's kind of the reason for doing it. So that's the whole conceit, is the lands matter. So let's actually make them matter. So I was looking at what lands I can run. I was like, oh, Lonely Sandbar. Love this card. It is a land that comes into play tapped for a blue, or you can cycle it for a blue. Cycling means that you means you discard it to draw a card. So we're drawing a card off of it. That goes great with our Nadir Kraken. But we're also discarding it. So then I was like, okay, let's like. Also, you have cards like Merfolk Looter. They can kind of you get a bit of overlap. I want Merfolk Looter to be a fantastic card in this cube, which draws us a card but also discards a card. So we can kind of lean into that. And then once we had that as like an idea, you have cards like Drakehaven. Really powerful payoff. 2 in a blue. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. That's a really strong payoff if you can lean into it and if you can get some cards discarded. Or you have an awesome card like Containment Construct. 2 generic for a 2/1 artifact creature construct. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. Like, I think you had this, and you definitely cast, or you played at least 2 or 3 Lonely Sandbars off of this for value. Like,
oh,
very
yeah,
cool.
It's a really nice little engine when you get it going, especially because hitting your land drops is really important and not trivial in this cube. You know, so getting to cycle your land and cast and play it in the same turn is really good.
Yeah, and then also I found a card like we've been running Marauding Mako in like high-powered cubes. I found there was a blue version. I forgot this card existed. Scrounging Skyray. 1 on a blue, 1/2, flyer. Whenever you discard one or more cards, put that many +1 counters on this creature, and cycling for 2 generic. So this card with turns a lonely sandbar into a flying beater. Like, that's very cool. And like, again, these are overarching things that kind of just rewarding us for what we're in theory going to be doing anyway, and that's kind of why I thought it worked quite nicely.
Yeah, seems really good. The Drake Haven especially is really, really powerful when you get it going.
Yeah.
Nice. And then another one which seems to have very strong support throughout the cube was an artifact you'd expect in a blue cube. How do you go about building that one?
So again, yeah, this one also, if I'm honest, it comes back to the lands, because when looking at at lands that tap to generate blue mana, we have Seat of the Synod. It's an artifact land. That is interesting. Again, so Seat of the Synod might be the most powerful land in this cube, because it is an artifact, it makes you colored mana, and it synergizes with stuff that cares about artifacts, number of artifacts in play, it cares about affinity, all that stuff's really good. So like, again, it started with the lands, and then it's like, okay, that's an interesting idea, how can we make this work? So you have cards like cards with affinity that make them cheaper to cast. So like Thoughtcast, we have to draw some cards with it, or like Somber Hoverguard makes a big flyer cheaper to cast. Then you also have a really cool card like Filigree Attendant. This is actually like my favorite. Like, this is the perfect power level for this cube. It's 2 blue for a star 3 artifact creature, homunculus with flying, and its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. For me, that is the perfect power level for this. It just rewards you for having more artifacts. It's an artifact itself, and like, what's nice with artifacts as well is it's a pretty generic theme. It's like a big, again, it's big and overarching. It's not like persist combo. I don't know why I said that. But
you've got a really big card pool to draw from if you're in blue artifacts matter, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like there's a very easy way of sprinkling more artifacts in this cube as well. So like, we have the artifact lands. Then also, because blue isn't really great at dealing with creatures once they're on the board, like, I made a bunch of the answers be artifacts. There's a bunch of like if you've played pre-release at any point in the last like 5 years, any of like the bear trap, it comes down, pings something, or destroys a opponent, like those kinds of, like, those are kind of like the cheap ways of answering stuff in this cube, and like them being artifacts, I think is quite nice. It just adds to the deck. It's pretty solid.
Yeah, for sure. And those cheap artifacts that have the potential to kill a creature, you also put Vial of Dragonfire, which we can get for Weaponsmith in this category. Like, they don't look like efficient cards because they're not efficient cards, but I think they are actually kind of premium in this queue, because we have a lot of synergy pieces here which really rely on our creatures sticking in play, and I assume for that reason the removal is very, very scarce. I assume that was an intentional choice.
It was, yeah. Just like actual factual good answer something is very rare in this. Like, because of the power of the cube, we can't go super efficient with our answers.
All right, that's very cool. So moving on, there's a really interesting archetype which I saw you drafted to great effect. There's tapping and untapping matters.
Yeah, this one is a bit nicher than some of the other ones, but it's something that blue does quite well, and it's something I've wanted to put in a cube for quite a while. So this kind of overarching archetype is rewarding you for tapping things for value and then untapping them to redo the value. So some of the most obvious ones are like a card like Prodigal Sorcerer or like Thorned Wind Fairies. These are effectively creatures that you can tap them to deal something a damage. So if you combine that with effects that untap them, like Penim's Aura, that is a aura that says pay a blue, untap target creature. That effectively can turn a Prodigal Sorcerer into a machine gun. That's like, if I'm honest with you, my a school teacher ruined me with that as a kid, and I've had that deck in the back of my head for a while. I'm like, that's quite cool. But then, like, because there's so many cool effects that you can combine with that, there's like Sigil of Sleep, which is like an effect that when a creature deals damage to a creature, bounce it. That turns your Prodigal Sorcerer into a machine gun that can bounce people's things. Or better, a card like Curiosity. You put Curiosity on a Prodigal Sorcerer, that means when it deals that if you ping the opponent, you draw a card, and then suddenly you then have overlap with your card draw matters deck, and then that becomes interesting and that becomes cool. It kind of starting to find that overlap for me was really interesting.
Yeah, really cool. And I think that overlap is important because none of these archetypes are so deeply supported that we're going to have a whole deck that is just doing one thing. We're probably going to be a mishmash of a couple of these archetypes, right? And if those archetypes have some natural synergies with each other, that gets really interesting, actually. Very nice. So moving on, there's a bunch of cards that care about islands, whether that's us having islands in play or our opponents having islands in play. And to set this in context, the island count is about 20 in the cube, I think?
So I think of our 70 lands, there are 25 basic islands, but then we have a couple of lands that are incidentally islands, so things like Moonrise Island, Mystic Sanctuary. So it's probably around the 28 mark would be my gut.
Okay, very cool. So we can get to a decent number, but we're not going to have for free 10 plus islands in our deck, right? We've got to do a bit of work to get there. What are the good payoffs for this?
So at a base level, you have creatures. You have creatures like a card like Tidewalker. 2 and a blue, star comes into play with a time counter on it for each island you control, vanishing, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of time counters on it. I knew I wanted islands to again. Most of my thoughts in this started with the lands and if we're doing a mono blue cube, islands really need to matter. So just finding any card that cared about islands in some way I thought was important. So Tidewalker is a great one. We have other creatures like Waterspout Djinn. It's 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you can return an untapped island you control to its owner's hand. 4/4 flyer for 4 mana is quite pushed in this format. So that being the downside, meaning you have to have islands, I think is fine. Obviously, we also have cards like High Tide. High Tide is a very powerful card. Kind of checked a little bit in this cube because there's only so much you can do with it. It's one of these things where in powerful cubes, you can run powerful cards if what you're doing with them is not the most broken. This cube could have Tinker in it if we're not tinkering for something stupid, if that makes sense. Tinker's not in, but as an example, you have a card like Gush that is a great card draw spell but needs islands in play. We have Flow of Ideas, that's 5 and a blue for a sorcery, draw a card for each island you control. Late game, hopefully drawing you at least 5 or 6 cards. I do know that our friend Josh drafted a deck and this only ever drew him 1 card, which is kind of hilarious, but interesting build around either way.
Yeah, there are more efficient ways to cycle cards in this cube than Flow of Ideas for 1.
6.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely one you have to work for, this archetype, right? Because the challenge is that there's 20 whatever islands in the cube, but you're not it's not like other people don't also want the islands. Because they're untapped lands, they're already quite premium. So I think the challenge is you've got to find a way to get would you be happy with 8 islands to make this deck work, do you think?
I think so. I think that's. I think at least 8 is what you're after, and this is kind of the most generic of the overarching archetypes, because in a way it's not just you having islands that matters; it's also your opponents having islands that matters. So there's creatures with there's a sprinkling of creatures with island walk, if that makes sense. So kind of it's and then it means you can weaponize a card like Spreading Seas to give your opponents islands. Islands mattering is the least fleshed out in terms of I do X and therefore I'm rewarded by this. There's a bit of sprinkling of, I have islands, it's good for me. My opponents have islands, that's also good for me because of island walk creatures. It was more of just a way of making islands matter, because if we're doing a mono blue thing, I think that's important.
That's cool, yeah. I was wondering, what do you think of Harbinger of the Seas for this archetype? Do you think it's too powerful? is 1 blue blue 2/2 creature, non-basic lands or islands.
Yeah, so this is like the blue blood moon. It will make non-basic non-basic lands lose their type. My gut is this might be too good just because there's only like 25 basics in the cube. Like it turns off everything else.
But they can still tap for blue, right? That's
true.
Most of what your land's trying to do in this cube anyway.
That is true, but it might just make the mana a bit too good then. It's interesting. So why this won't be in the cube is because generally when I was looking at power level, it was I kind of started from like peasant down, so anything from like an uncommon down was fine, and then rares I tried to keep them in check. Like when I was looking at rares, it was very much trying to keep them pre-2020. And if I'm honest, this is an MH3 card, so it probably didn't come up in my search.
Oh, yeah, no, that makes total sense. I was kind of just thinking about Harbinger of the Seas plus Flow of Ideas sounds kind of sick.
That is quite fun. Yeah.
And Harbinger of the Seas plus Scold is also pretty spicy.
Potentially, so because it only has 2 toughness, that means it could get in, because a bunch of our answers deal with stuff that's low toughness. So yeah, potentially. Yeah. I think that could be a good one. Yeah, could be an interesting one for the future.
Nice. Cool, so moving on. One of the things that struck me looking at this cube, when we think of what blue does, in a lot of cubes, blue has like a Spellslinger, Instants and Sorceries Matter type archetype. We don't have that here. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so like there's a light touch of this that do other things. Like for me, the power level of Spellslinger, like all the ones that you actually want to play, I think might be a bit too powerful. Like there is a couple that I like could see myself adding if I made this up to a larger cube. But like, for example, like a card like Talrand in this cube would just be too good. Like the actual kind of like the Spellslinger payoffs you think of when you think of like generally they're like making tokens. Like, can you imagine like a Chrome Host Seed Shark in this cube, James? Like that would be nuts.
Yeah, it'd be revolting. You can never kill it either.
Yeah. It's one of those ones where I think there's a world where maybe because it is just something blue generically does. Like I could see myself making a bigger archetype. Maybe cards like Thunder Drake, like 3 and a blue, 2/3 flyer. When you cast your second spell each turn, put a counter on it. Stuff like that potentially, rather than going super ham with like the more powerful, more generic, like more commander based Spellslinger payoffs. But like I thought the obvious payoffs would just be too powerful. And I like there are some cards that like reward you for casting spells and stuff, but it's more like they're like milling out an opponent, that kind of stuff. They're doing something else rather than just giving you value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I can see you don't want the super powerful Spellslinger payoffs because they're just going to be a bit free to enable, right? In a mono blue cube, it's not really doing work to put spells in your mono blue deck, is it?
Yeah, and it is a thing of like more. There are more non-creature spells than creatures in this cube. Like it is a blue-based cube. We are running more non-creature spells than we are creatures by a fair margin, I think. So, like, and in my head as well, when I was building it, I was kind of thinking like old Magic of like the spells are good, the creatures are bad. That's kind of how like I want people to draw lots of cards. I want people to do cool things with their spells, but like how you get across the board, and this does friend of the channel, Josh Firestrike Modo, he has his blue nothing cube. There were some there's inspirations from that. Like I didn't go as ham in the do nothing part of it, but like the engine part of it, I definitely leaned into and like that was an inspiration. And like for me, it was important to not have the creatures be as pushed, and I feel a lot of the Spellslinger payoffs are creatures that are a bit too pushed.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially as the removal is sparse and not super efficient. It's we don't want creatures that can just take over the game, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So I think those are the main or most widely supported packages. Are there any other packages you wanted to highlight as we're going through?
Yeah, so we have our overarching like things you can do in this cube, things that are going to be there. But like the other thing that I think is important with any cube is to try and support your more the other type of overarching decks, which are like aggro, control, tempo, mid-range, and combo. So I think having options for those again leads to a more rounded cube environment. And kind of like if you think of things for those to do, then I think the cube will just play better. So if I'm honest, like I thought tempo and mid-range would kind of take care of themselves with everything that we've previously gone over. Like mid-rangey drawing cards, that seems pretty solid. Like so, but like to make sure I had some aggro, that's where like cheap island walk creatures kind of came in. We have like Grayscale Gariel and Rishadan Dockhand. These are effectively 1-power creatures with island walk. We can add cards like a Trusty Machete or a Butcher's Cleaver, and then we kind of get the cool unblockable creature aggro, deal you some damage type of thing. Like I thought that was quite cool. Like suit up an unblockable creature, swing for damage. That is fun. And also you then get the nice overlap with that of like unblockable creatures with cards like Coastal Piracy. I love flying men. Going full flying men I think would be too good, but like adding a sprinkling of Coastal Piracy effects. These are cards that when a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Again, that's leaning into the card draw thing. That's pretty good. Also, we like that's kind of how Curiosity was meant to be played. Put it on an unblockable creature, deal damage to an opponent, draw a card. Having the backups for that is quite nice. So yeah, that kind of filled my aggro element out a little bit. The next one I wanted to look at was combo. So like there is sort of a reanimator package in here, which I think is quite fun. Like the main payoffs are like God Pharaoh's Gift, Dread Return, which we've mentioned, and Reenact the Crime. These are cards that effectively let you put things from your graveyard into play, which I think is quite cool. In terms of reanimated targets, we have a card like Colossal Sky Turtle. Again, tricky to cast in this because it requires 2 green pips to actually cast, but it can put itself into the graveyard and be a bounce spell, and then we can get it back with one of our reanimator effects. And then this one I'm quite proud of finding anyway, or putting in. The other reanimator payoff is Oversoul of Dusk. It is 5 hybrid Selesnya pips for a 5/5 protection from blue, from black, and red. There is no way of casting this in this cube, but if you can reanimate it, I think that's hilarious because effectively it's protection from everything. This is like our Progenitus, basically.
Yeah, very cool. That's a lot of layers in this cube before you get to 5 Selesnya mana.
I think, yeah, if you draft every layer and everything that makes treasure, you might just be able to cast it, maybe.
No, that's very cool. It's I remember like opening up the first pack being like, mono blue cube. This is a lot of Selesnya pips, but it makes a lot of sense. And I think there's good overlap between a lot of these things as well, right? Like the God Pharaoh's Gift, good for Reanimator, but also just good in an artifact deck. You're good at making the mana for it. Like Renowned Weaponsmith, particularly, I think goes really well with that card because you just tapping for 2 artifacts mana gets you to 7 really quickly.
Yeah, exactly, and that kind of leans like that kind of the God Pharaoh's Gift as well is like it kind of leans like there is sort of like a big ramp deck in this. Again, we have High Tide, we have cards like the Weaponsmith, and that's kind of what like Dreamscape Artist and the Carpet of Flowers that we mentioned are good for. Like you have God Pharaoh's Gift as a payoff, but also there's like Mass Manipulation, Big X spell that gains control of a bunch of things, or Colossal Whale, massive blue creature with Island Walk that bounce stuff. Kind of like that's the big mana is kind of where I saw the control deck kind of getting its shine, if that makes sense. Like it's the deck that's going slower and is able to go above your opponent by casting big spells. Early game, it'll cast counter spells and like interact a little bit, but then late game, it's just going bigger, being more control-ive, and I thought that was quite cool. And yeah, kind of the last little package, going back to combo, is there's a bit of a self-mill package in here. We have ways of milling out either us or our opponents. Like we have a Hedron Crab in here. We have a Jace's Erasure, which is 1 in the blue. Whenever you draw a card, you may have target player put the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. But then we have cards like Cephalid Illusionist, which can mill us a lot. And then we have cards like a Laboratory Maniac, classic card that lets us win the game if we have no cards in deck. And then a nice little backup for that in Living Conundrum. This is one I just 100% stole from Josh, if I'm honest with you. 4 on a blue, 2/5, hexproof. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, skip that draw instead. And as long as there are no cards in your library, Living Conundrum has base power and toughness 10/10 and has flying and vigilance.
Yeah, that one's really cool.
Yeah, I really like this card. So, like, this effectively, this is your second copy of Blabman, but it just gives you a 10 and you have to beat down your opponent. That's really funny and really fun. And, like, yeah, to add this was, like, 3 or 4 cards, and you have this whole self-mill deck, and that's interesting. Like having these little packages for me was quite important because, yeah, we have our overarching archetypes, but then with these packages, people can make the unique decks, and this because of how this cube is built and is drafted, effectively you're going to end up with like a deck that's made up of like one of the overarching archetypes and then like 2 or 3 of the packages. You're not going to end up with the same thing every time. Like no one's going to end up with the same deck every time. You're going to be combining this and that and this and that and to build something cool each time, and that was really fun for me.
Yeah, no, I think it comes together really nicely. All right, so we've talked a lot about the little packages of synergy we've got, but we know we do need some glue cards for Cube and some staples. How'd you go about picking those out?
Yeah, with any cube, it is important to make your staples lean into what the cube is doing. So by staples, I mean stuff like ramp, card draw, interaction, like that kind of stuff. Like, because this was a mono blue cube, it's very tempting to run a card like Counterspell. Very powerful, very generically good card. And I've already said I wanted spells to be powerful, where that is. But like, looking at the threats, Counterspell is too strong. And it's not interesting. Why run Counterspell when you can run a card like Deprive? Deprive is blue, counter-target spell. We love that. But as an additional cost to cast Deprive, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Again, I'm making it come back to the land part. That's more interesting than me. It's making it flavorful and making it work with the cube. You also have a card like Gainsay, which may be too powerful. I'm not sure yet. Maybe more testing. But it's 1 blue, instant counter-target blue spell. Or a card like Jaded Response. 1 blue, instant counter-target spell if it shares a color with a creature you control. These are more interesting. Like, there's a world where they might be more powerful than Counterspell, but they are more interesting than Counterspell in this style of environment. And again, it's kind of counter-target blue spell might seem quite obvious in this, but it's an interesting card. You would only get to like what part of the point. Like for me, one of the fun parts about building something weird is finding the weird cards that work with it and letting them shine. If Gainsay turns out to be too good and it just becomes the best card, then maybe I'll cut it in the future. But like, if I'm building a mono blue, if I'm building something weird, I want to be able to see, Gainsay, awesome card that works really well in this format. I'm going to run it.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it's not a counter everything, like, 'cause there are a lot of big artifacts that you might want to counter.
Yeah. Does nothing against Godfarer's Gift. There are ways around it. Exactly.
Very true. But if we're in for counter-type blue spells, I know we're doing some, like, color breaks for super high power level cards. I wonder if, like, Pyroblast and Red Blast are things we could consider.
Potentially.
Because obviously they're, like, completely cracked, but making red mana is not a trivial thing.
Yeah, I mean, what's more broken, Scold or Pyroblast? There's a question where they're both about as good as each other, yeah. Yeah, potentially, yeah, I could see, yeah, potentially. It's definitely something you can do in this environment of, like, as long as the mana isn't as free, if they have to work for it and they can get it that way, then yeah, it's definitely something we can do. Like, similarly with the power level, it's also because I knew I wanted the tap deck to exist, which revolved around, like, the way you win is by putting 1, maybe 2 auras onto a creature. I wanted there to be interaction, so I didn't want a bunch of hex-proof creatures running around. Like, I actually didn't have that much. There isn't that much hexproof in this cube. But like having a bunch of instant speed bounce would just make that deck unplayable. So there is some, but like most of it is at sorcery speed. And for me, that was quite key in just making that deck exist. But it doesn't mean they're boring. Like we have a card like Clutch of Currents. Single blue, sorcery, return target creature to its own hand, but it has Awaken 3 for 4 and a blue, which means it can become an elemental creature. The land becomes a creature. It's doing something with lands. It fits into the theme of the cube. That's more interesting than just running an unsummon that just hoses one deck entirely.
So we're one draft into this so far. I thought it played out great in that draft. How did you think that went?
Yeah, it nailed everything that I was after. Everyone, while drafting, got a little bit sweaty in terms of, am I going to get there? Is it going to be okay? I'll be honest, my wife finishing with 22 lands really threw a spanner in. She finished with 22 lands and 5 AKs or something like that. I was like, damn, she has it all. But no, it was a lot of fun. Like, I think every archetype shined. I think everything did as well as I wanted to. Like nothing was the best, if that makes sense. Nothing was so far beyond what anything else was. The only there was a couple of sections of just raw efficiency, and that's basically down to like I think I did quite well with the power level of setting it as commons and uncommons, and then try and get rares like broken rares before 2020 are fine. If a rare's after that, have to check it a little bit. But like honestly, just like some super modern commons and uncommons are still quite busted. So I've swapped some out. Like we were running a couple of like affinity creatures from like the turtle set and recent sets, and they're just so much better than some of the old affinity creatures that they were a little free, if that makes sense. But like outside of that, I was very happy with the power level, and yeah, honestly, it's a lot of fun. Like from my end, I think we're going to be doing a bunch more of this, and I'm also kind of excited to like take what I've learned from this, and maybe I think maybe green next. I think I might do a green one next, like green or red is what I'm thinking. Like partly
okay,
like
that sounds cool. Does green do enough things though? Is my question about green.
I think it doesn't. I think it does enough things badly.
Okay.
Because like power level wise, we have we have what auras, or we have enchantress. We have some artifact stuff. We have tokens. We have landfall. I think there's some interesting stuff there. I think red could be fun. Like, red could just be like throwing kindles at each other. But I think there's a world where maybe I start doing an overview for a bunch of these and see which ones we like, basically.
Yeah, no, it sounds very cool. Certainly this one, I think, has played out great. So I think this works really well as a 4-player cube. If someone's listening and wants to try and scale this up to an 8-player version, do you think that would be viable?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that I would... So, yeah, I thought about this a bit. Like the first thing I would do is double the number of lands, because you have double the number of players, double the number of cards, double the number of lands. So, yeah, the cube would go from a 216 to a 432. That sounds about right. There's a few other, like, I would look for redundancy of packages, and also because I've broken Singleton, if there's key effects I can't get more of, or there isn't redundancy for, just add a second one. Like, if I can't find another cool reanimate to pay off, maybe not a second copy of Godpharaoh's Gift, but like a second copy of Gate to the Afterlife, the card that goes and finds it. That could be interesting. I would also probably look at maybe adding more packages. Like for a long time, like Pirate Aggro was in this. But I definitely found with the small version anyway, specifically Typal Matters is quite tricky. I could have pushed Merfolk, or I could have pushed humans or pirates, but then it becomes a bit too on the rails. I think if it was bigger, maybe that's possible. I'd also add more morphs. Originally, Fathom Seer was in this. That's the gush on a morph creature, but it was the only morph creature in here, so therefore, like, that's not interesting to me. I think you need at least Willbender and Fathom Seer in here to make that interesting. Maybe ideally a few more, like putting like a Chroma in here could be fun. I don't know how you would flip it. Seems like something for players to work out. There is some blue flicker. Maybe that might just be a bit too good, but like stuff like that is interesting. We could do that. We also have like the Pickles combo, the combo that locks your opponent's stuff down. That could be quite interesting. And I would definitely add more cards that care about names. That was the main thing for me that I really liked about this cube. I want to build more cubes that care about names. So like a card like Screaming Seahawk was in for a while. I would add that to a larger version. That's 4 and a blue, 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card named Screaming Seahawk, put it into your hand, and shuffle. I'd add more stuff like that because I think that's one of the nice things you can do with this style of environments, and I think it's actually, I think stuff that cares about names is actually good here.
Yeah, I think it's cool, and I think it's something we don't get to explore in Cube very often, so it's really nice when we can.
Yeah, exactly. And like the only other thing, like and I think this goes for anyone building a desert, like looking for nice self-contained draft archetypes from Limited, I think are quite good. So like maybe pushing energy could be fun. Maybe like lessons could be interesting here, because it's kind of like those are kind of archetypes that don't really get to shine too much in bigger cubes. But here the power level is low enough, and because you're drafting every card, you can actually sculpt archetypes that actually work. And that's quite interesting to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's very cool. It'd be nice to see a scaled up version. If anyone decides to build it, pop a list in the comments.
Oh, I think it's more, if after listening to this I get enough of our playgroup mentioning it to me, then yeah, maybe we can scale it up.
That. All right, nice. I think that probably wraps it up. This was a super fun cube to play, and it's interesting to dig into the design process a little bit, because it is very different from building a regular cube with a basic land box. All right, that was a really interesting conversation to have. I think we're going to wrap it up there. You have been listening to Powerful Nothing. Please do like, share, subscribe, all of those good things. It really helps us out. And we will see you next time.